It's Victor Purcell, and this is Now Until Up. We have Dr. Mike here from Big League Performance. I've had a few ailments over the last few years competing in little tweaks, little body, pains here and there. And this guy's helped me out. But that's an informal introduction. I'll let you give your spiel.
Well, thanks for having me on, Vic. I appreciate it. Yeah, my physical therapy practice, or really we use physical therapy for lack of a better term. I almost feel like it's lifestyle therapy is a more appropriate term for us, what we do. Big league performance and rehab, we look to work with people not just to get them out of pain, but to keep them out of pain and improve their performance. And so, it really lines up with, what your idea, what your ideas are and what your training is and what your goals are. And, what we try and do is we're trying to change that narrative from everything in healthcare being a reactive concept to, to a proactive model. Everything we do is, I hurt my back or I have high cholesterol or where it might be, and I have to go get treatment. Whereas instead, let's get out in front of it, and it wouldn't be better not to have to deal with these things in the first place. And that's where I think, our paths crossed in terms of, you had some things you were dealing with, but it wasn't just a matter of simply getting out of dealing with pain or an injury. It was, I have bigger things in front of me that I want to accomplish. And so here we are.
Yeah, I like that. I think that is important. It's not always about something happening and then you go, oh, let me go to the doctor or let me go get some treatment. It's like, you know, I have stuff happening all the time because I train so much, and it's always something new. Like every month, I might have some. It hasn't. Knock on wood, it hasn't been like a real injury or anything. But it's just like, over time, you realize that your body isn't bulletproof. So I definitely get a lot of value and benefit from going to see you. But let's talk about how you got into this whole space. Like what made you want to become a doctor of physical therapy? What is the proper title that we should be using?
Doctor of physical therapy. That's what we are, man. Yeah.
There it is.
It's always fun. People, I think, the physical therapy profession's gone through a lot of changes over the years from, I guess like the inception in the 60s and 70s where it was basically a certificate to then it was a bachelor's, and then in the 90s it became a master's, and then at some point in 2000s it became a doctoral program. So people are always like, "Oh wait, you're a doctor?" And I'm like, "Yes." Or even like you just said, and I have to call you out here, but you were just like, "Ah, never an injury where I have to go to the doctor." But like, well, I'm a doctor. So it's one of those things. But yeah, my story. Yeah, I grew up playing sports. I was a baseball player my whole life, and it was my sophomore year of high school, and I got injured during tryouts actually, and I was a pitcher, and I couldn't play baseball that season, and I was going to physical therapy, and I basically realized at that point probably wasn't going to be a major leaguer, so needed to figure out what else I was going to do with my life, and so I liked my physical therapist. I liked how he worked with athletes and help people get back to doing the things they love to do, and at that point I realized this might be something I like, and it's been a pretty steady path from that point towards where we are today, which has been super super exciting. And I think I'm probably in the minority as the who really knew what they wanted to do when they were 15, 16 years old. But here we are.
Yeah, you know what's crazy about that? So the first time, it's not the first time I went to physical therapy, but it was the first time I had a real injury. So I ruptured my Achilles in 2012, I think, and so I was basically going to the physical therapist a lot. And
Oh yeah.
because like I basically showed up and said, "Hey, I want to get back to," like at the time I was just playing a lot of basketball in completely different time, but um at that moment, like I obviously I'm not a physical therapist, but I also had like an interest in the space because like the interaction that I had back then, I was like, oh, this is different. It's like it's a whole different career field that like you might not even know about unless you actually have to interact with the physical therapist. And I mean, since then I've had different interactions and whatnot, but I will say it is different going to see you because I think it's like more. It's way different than like when I actually had an injury. Like the type of stuff that we do, like we're actually like using a barbell, right? And we're
Yeah.
doing kettlebell. Like it's a completely different lane that I never even really thought about until I actually went, to your practice. So,
At the end of the day, physical therapy should be physical. You know,
hmm
your rehab, your goals, your rehab should match what your goals are, right? And so if you're not doing stuff that's going to get you back to, in your case, doing high rocks or doing, fitness, sport related issue things, then like, what are you doing here, right? If you're a basketball player and you're not working on your jumping, if you're a baseball player, and you're not working on, overhead, motions, like what are you doing? And your goals, it should be challenging, right? Because at the end of the day, like running, high rocks, right? Those are hard things to do, and so you need to be challenged to get back to those things. And for someone like you, you're not just trying to run or just trying to finish a high rocks race. You're trying to compete in that race, right? So we need to push you extra far. And I think for us, our background at Big League is we're all not just doctors, but we're also strength and conditioning coaches, right? And so I think there's a big divide between the healthcare community and the fitness community. And I think we're in a unique position to bridge that gap between healthcare and performance. There's a real gray area there where you go to your you might go to your MD and they'll tell you don't squat, don't run, but then you go to you go to the gym and it's like you should squat, you should run. And so for so long they've butted heads, and I feel like at Big League, we're in a position to bridge that gap and create some unity there, and a lot of people to do the things they want to do. I don't think if you go to the your MD, go to your ortho, and they tell you, oh man, you should never squat again, you should never run again. It's like, well, but I love to do that, right? So I think there should be a way to keep doing the things you love to do without having to deal with pain on a regular basis.
yeah. It, so you said a couple things that I think I want to touch on. One is you kind of hinted towards like some of the misconceptions about what physical therapy should be, and then the second thing you said at the end was pain. And let's start with the second thing. So pain, like what is pain? Because I know we've talked about this, but like pain in the sense of how we should interpret how we feel as athletes that may be dealing with things because we're working out so much, we're training so much, and talk about pain.
At the end of the day, pain is a normal part of the human experience, right? It's something that we all experience, and it's a good thing that we experience it, right? Pain is a warning sign. It's an evolutionary mechanism. It's why we don't play in fire like our caveman ancestors, right? It's something that's used to guide us, right? And I think at the end of the day, we try and use it as a guide, and it's something you shouldn't necessarily fear, right? But it's something you should be aware of. And I think for us at Big League, we've talked about during our sessions where, a little bit of pain, over the course of a workout, not the end of the world. But there's certain barriers that depending on, or certain levels, depending on the injury, depending on what your goals are, that you should always be aware of. And I think, we've come to really demonize pain as a bad thing. But like I said, it's not the end of the world. And I think people, if they go out for a run and they get the littlest bit of pain, they shut things down, right? And I can't say like that's, you shouldn't shut things down, or you should shut things down, but it's maybe not necessarily always the end all be all that we make it out to be. And I think the more we can get people accustomed to, doing those things that they love to do, I think they end up being able to work through things a little bit more comfortably than what they might think they're able to do.
Yeah, and for me, it's like the different things that you experience over time. You realize, oh, that's this type of pain, or that's oh, this is this other type, oh, this is something else. I need to really go sit down. So, but I talk to people, and I realize like some people, like you said, they just sit down and say I can't do anything with any little discomfort. I'm like, discomfort is normal, and I
Right.
think that's important.
to compete at that level, right? Like the level that you compete at, like your body's going to get banged up a little bit, right? And one of the biggest goals that we work towards at Big League is getting you able to listen to your body. Being able to listen to your body. And if like, all right, well, if I do whatever, during if I do 5 miles, well, maybe that's going to be, yeah, that's the cutoff point for me. Maybe I can do 4 miles and I'll be fine. But if I do 5 miles, that's where it is. Or oh, I know like I got a little bit of something there, but if I go a little faster, it'll kick up. So maybe just I'll keep my intensity a little bit lower. And so this way you're able to listen to your body and kind of guide yourself through the process of, okay, what can I do? What can I do during my day? And I think that's the idea. And again, it goes back to the whole idea of like pain isn't necessarily the end all be all, but you're just learning to live with it because, like I said, we can't avoid it. It's part of our life. You're gonna have pain, whether you like it or not. You can't live a 100% pain-free life. As much as we'd like for it to be that way, you're gonna experience it at some point in your life.
So the what you touched on a little bit earlier, well, to me, it's like what would you consider the misconceptions of what it is that you do and or what PT is? And I realize it's probably something different for everybody. So anybody listening to this isn't medical advice. This is discussion. So
The the biggest misconception I think is the idea of a quick fix. I think people come in and they're like, oh, I'll do, I think there's two thoughts of physical therapy. Is there's one like physical therapy, like, oh, that's what my grandma does, or if I get surgery, if I have a big injury, I have to go to physical therapy. That's like one thought is like my grandma does it, or if I tear my ACL, I have to go to physical therapy. No, because I guarantee you, most of the people that are listening to this right now probably wake up in the morning with a little bit of back pain or a little bit of neck pain or maybe during their workout their knee hurts a little bit or something, right? No one's 100% pain free. um, and then the other part is the idea of the quick fix. And I think people come in, they're like, I just want to just do 1 or 2 sessions and I'll be good to go. I'll just get back to running a marathon the next week. It's like, no, no, it doesn't work that way. People come in, they've had back pain for 10 years and they're like, oh, I'll just do a couple sessions. Man, I wish it was that easy. I wish that was easy. I probably wouldn't have a job, right? But I wish it was that easy. But no, the idea is that this stuff takes time. There are no quick fixes, and the concept of dry needling and Graston and cupping and all these common things you see out there in kind of the sports world and you get have gotten popular out there. Yes, they have their role. Dry needling has its role. Cupping has its role. Graston has its role. Is it the end all be all? Is it the quick fix? Is it the silver bullet that everyone's looking for? And the answer is no.
let's get into something that I think it's a little specific, right? But I think the demographic may fit into this box. The aging athlete. So there's the 35 plus athlete. I'm currently in the 35 to 39 age group. I'm about to get out of that age group pretty soon, and but I still feel young. I feel like I feel like I'm in almost the best shape of my life, right? In certain aspects. Um, what do you think is important for us to understand?
That age doesn't matter. At the end of the day, just because you're 35 or you're 39 or you're 45 or you're 49 or you're 69, it doesn't matter. That's really who we focus on at Big League is that aging athlete, the weekend warrior. And just because you're getting a little bit older and maybe things might not necessarily work as they did when you were 22 or 23, doesn't mean you can't do those things anymore. You can still run, you can still jump, you can still compete, you can still play basketball, you can still do high rock, you can still do CrossFit, whatever it might be. You can still do those things. Um, but there's probably a little bit more effort that goes into it now, right? Those things are still possible. If you love to play baseball, you love to play basketball, or you love to run, keep doing those things. You know, I think that's the problem is we kind of got this in society. We've gotten this thought in our head that like, as I get older, Can't do those things anymore. I can't play anymore. I can't, and sure, can you play at the level you did when you were 18 or 22? Probably not. But or maybe you can. I don't know. A lot of times we see a lot of runners who get those PRs at 40, 45 years old. That's a thing. That's a real thing. So for me to sit here and say like, no, you can't do those things because you're 40. So what? Look at LeBron right now. Look at what LeBron's doing, right? I mean, he's obviously an exception and he's got, millions of dollars he invests in his body, but also at the same time though, look what, investing in your health does for you, right? He invests $1 million a year in his body, right? And so, and here he is performing at almost 40 years old, right? So I think the ability to uh, prioritize your health and invest in your health as you get older allows you to keep doing those things. And I think we see that with, like I said, the aging runner. You see these runners who are 50, 55 years old, and they're still out there, still chugging, they're still running hard, still, doing the things they want to do. And so I think with the aging athlete, my biggest thing is like there's an answer somewhere. Don't you don't need to stop just because you're 35 or you're 40, whatever it might be. You can keep going. So that's kind of my thought. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of my thought on
No,
that
I think
population.
it does answer it because I don't think there's I'm asking these questions because I don't want to use my own what I thought before as like the baseline, right? It's important to maybe challenge what you may have thought, and talk to somebody who's actually not using their own individual situation as a baseline. Like you're actually treating people, like, and you're seeing people where like I know my own situation, so. Um, and so on the other side of that, though, what would you say to like the younger athlete and what they need to pay attention to? Because obviously it's a completely different
You know, there,
situation.
there's there's two things I think, with the younger population is number one, like don't be afraid to get strong. I think especially in like the like endurance world, whether it's like running or things along that lines, like don't be afraid to lift weights and get strong. I grew up in the playing baseball and 15 years ago, and it's still the mentality of like, oh, we shouldn't, we don't want to get too bulky, and you still hear that basketball, baseball, endurance, you don't get too bulky, you don't want to get too bulky, but like you can still lift weights, you can still get strong, and like the idea of like getting bulky, in quotations here, is like go ahead and try. Like you want to get too bulky, go ahead and try. I'd like to see you get too bulky because what actually goes into that, male or female, is a lot of not just lifting, but also diet and genetics
Hmm.
and all these other factors that don't be afraid to get strong. And the second thing is eat more. Plain and simple, eat more. When it comes to youth athletes, they need to, I don't think they quite grasp how much, their diet really affects their performance and their ability to develop. I work with these like high school athletes, and you talk to them about what they ate for breakfast, and it's a Pop Tart, maybe a bagel if you're lucky. They're a sandwich for lunch, and they're not getting those calories. And I look back at myself when I was in high school, and I had a shit breakfast, had a shit lunch, and then I had crushed dinner, and then I have like a protein shake, right? And I'd be like, why can't I gain any weight? Guess what? You're eating a bologna and cheese sandwich for lunch. That's why you
Hmm.
weren't getting any weight. And so I think for those youth athletes, it's don't be afraid to get strong, and you know eat, eat. Don't be afraid to eat. So yeah,
Yeah, and another thing I would say is, what you can get away with today, you're not going to be able to get away with in the future. And what you said about getting strong, so way back in the day, years and years ago, when I was in the military, obviously we got the PT test. We do a lot of running, rucking, and all that type of stuff. I was pretty fast, and I didn't realize it at the time. But I'm not as fast now as I was back then. But um, I had a lot of knee issues though, and I think that as a young 18, 19, 20, 21 year old, I'm just thinking I have knee issues, or this is, the Army messed my knees up. But now I realize, like, after doing strength training over the years, still having some knee quirks here and there because I played basketball a lot over the years. I don't play as much basketball anymore. I actually haven't played in a while, in over a year or two. But I don't really have any knee issues like that. I have maybe some mobility things to work on, but I run way more now too. And that's the crazy thing. It's like I wasn't running nearly as much when I was young. I was just faster, and my running form was probably way off. Just long strides for 2 miles. Um, but yeah, so like the idea that you can't fix. So this is what I was getting at. The idea as a young person that you can't fix the things that maybe ailing you at that age, and you can't work on them over time to where like maybe when you're older you won't even have those issues, depending on how that plays out. Because I know it's not to say I don't pay attention to my knees, but like I'm literally like I can run 16 miles and not have any knee problems.
Yeah,
So
it's that's a real thing. I mean, I think, the idea, like, I think it comes down to the mindset. It's the same thing with like aging, right? Like as you get older, you're just like, can't do this anymore. And likewise, we have people that come in and, oh, I got a bad back. When I was 16, I hurt my back and it's been bad ever since, but they're 42. And you're like, well, it's been, 35 years. Maybe we might be able to move past this. And I think it comes down to, what you're willing to invest in the process. And I think if people are willing to invest in that process of working on themselves, there's a chance. I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of fear mongering in healthcare where, you hurt your back when you're a teenager, and the doctor tells you, oh, you should never squat again, right? Or maybe you herniated a disc or something like that, and like, never squat again. Well, the thing is, if you look at, they've done these studies where they look at people with herniated discs, and they've MRI'd thousands of people, and they look at the average like 20-year-old herniated disc. It's a good like 20-25% of like all like people that age have a herniated disc, regardless of whether they have back pain or not. It doesn't always correlate with back pain. It correlates just you just have a herniated disc. Between you and me, at our ages, we probably have a couple of herniated discs also, but neither one of us has back pain. So, it's one of those things where you can kind of, you hurt yourself, right? You tweak your lower back and you get a MRI that says you have a herniated disc, and guess what? That's it. Death sentence. You can never squat again. And, you know, there's a lot more out there that we know. We know discs can heal themselves, and you can survive with a herniated disc. I mean, we know these things, and instead people hear them when they're young, and it sticks with them forever. And so I think if we're able to start to spread that message that, we're resilient, we're robust, and, we're able to do things. Um, if you're willing to put the work in, you're able to, if you want to squat and, you hurt yourself years ago, there's a way to help you squat again. So I think um, it's it comes down to, a lot of it comes down to the messaging, really.
I think it's Matt Frazier. I think he has like had like two back surgeries before he even started um,
Yeah,
CrossFit. That's before CrossFit. So
yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
and there it is. That just proof in the pudding. Obviously, he's a freak athlete, so he might have some other things going on. But like you said, like it's not the end of the world. And whether you go back to what you were, or maybe you get better. Because that's the thing. It's like you could have had deficiencies that you never even touched on, and you know, I think that's where it's the mindset thing. But so now I want to get into what you've seen because you've treated a few people that go to Elevate that compete in hybrid racing, and what is your take on this whole thing, this whole new hybrid racing space? You got these people trying to run all these miles and lift all these weights, and it's like kind of conflicting from what a traditional athlete who will be one or the other, right? So now you got to deal with both. both people, but in one person.
Yeah, it's exciting. I love it. I love the challenge. I think, as physical therapists, we kind of get into this profession because we like to solve problems. And I think, the high rocks athlete, the hybrid athlete, I think, is a really tricky but also really fun athlete to work with. And yeah, because there is such, there's a lot of challenges in terms of endurance, but also strength, power, and finding the right balance of that, right? And again, it comes back to what I said earlier, where your rehab should look like what your goal activity is, and that's what it comes down to. Is when we're working with someone like the high rocks athlete, we want to make sure that we're touching all of our bases. That's what it comes down to, and I think for us, we're lucky enough to work with our people one on one for an hour, and in that hour, we're really able to kind of harness in on what it might be like. For us, like between us, we've been working on like your ability to get better at like walking lunges, right? And so it's like, how do we improve your strength, but also how do we improve that strength, you know over time, right? Over the course of a race, factor it in. So we might do things that um you know while we're looking at total strength, we're also looking at how does it within a workout, right? So maybe we incorporate lunges, but then we also incorporate some kind of cardio component, but then we add another strength component into it, because it's like when you do go do a high rocks race, it's there's all those different events that you're doing at the same time. So it's like, let's challenge your body in that sense. So if we're going to get better at lunging, I keep using lunging as an example, keep using you as an example. We want to tie it in with other activities, because that's how you're going to face it in real life. And just we want to make it as relatable as possible, so that when you get into that game situation, you're ready to roll because your body's already prepped.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so many different like body types and backgrounds in this space that, but everybody's trying to get to the same finish line, right? So it's like you're
Yeah.
gonna have the flexible person, and you're gonna have the stiff athlete, and then you got the person that's been running for years, and the person that's just trying to get into it. So I really, that does sound like a puzzle to try to solve. Because even with just not necessarily physical therapy, but trying to design training, for myself sometimes, and or like just following somebody else's training plan. It's like it's so many things that I gotta consider. It's like, do I really need to run this many miles? Or do I need to lift this much weight? Like I can already lift enough, right? So it is a puzzle. So it sounds like it's a puzzle all the way around the board.
It it is, and I think it comes down to like what your goals are, right? And like I as I use you as an example with like the lunges, right? You've had you've wanted to work on the lunges, and we've talked about like the knees, right? And so it's like, well, how do we hit those factors, right? But then at the same time, though, let's keep an eye on you know the burpee broad jumps, right? Let's keep an eye on the wall balls, right? Because they all kind of like will like tie into each other, right? So it's like we can make one thing the main thing, but then also on the back burner, let's make sure these other things are still going to work, and then also let's make sure your conditioning is still good too. So like I said, it's really like kind of like juggling a bunch of plates, but then like being able to emphasize one thing when you need it to, and then like when you come in and you're like, hey, like I struggle with my wall balls. All right, well, let's switch something to the front burner, right? And then we can focus on wall balls at that time.
hmm Yeah. So there's obviously like a community, an athlete community here. And not everybody doesn't know everybody, but a lot of people follow each other on social media. And so, what types of, well, what would you say about like the DC like athlete community, or the different types of athletes you see coming through your doors? And obviously not every single person that's coming through, but obviously like there's some more known different types of people coming through. They do high rocks, runners, triathlon. There's a bunch of run clubs, and
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think the DC, I think DC wins. It's won like the fittest city in the country. A couple years ago, and like Arlington wins it. Every year also. So it's like it's a really, I think it's one of the fittest communities in the country, right? And so I love that. I think DC itself, with its background, being kind of like a government city with just kind of the people who come here and live here. I think it's a very driven city. I think you get a lot of Type A personalities and people who want to not just get by but get better, which I think is a really cool population to work with. And so I love it. People are driven, and I always say at Big League, our one thing is like people always ask, who do we work with? And the answer is anyone who has a goal, right? Whether that's to win a high rocks race, finish a high rocks race, or you're just looking to keep up with your kids. It's people who are driven and goal oriented, and that's what's so special about this community. And I think it's a lot of like there's a lot of just connection with between the different gyms, between the different athletes, and I think everyone's really supportive of each other, and there's a lot of like I don't get a lot of kind of like jealousy between the two. It's a lot of you see people working out at one gym, then they work out at a different gym, and I think that's a special kind of community where everyone's kind of really supportive of each other, and pushing each other to improve. And I think it's funny. I kind of see certain gyms now starting to get more into the high rocks racing, and I think it's only gonna move the sport forward. Not just here in DC, but nationally. I think you're going to see that start to spread more and more. So it's cool to be a part of this, as an athlete, but then also as a provider as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily go to a lot of different places, like a lot of different gyms. I mean, I obviously like I go to Elevate. That's where I met you. You did one of
Yeah,
your info. What was it? I forgot which session it was, but it was like a mobility.
that was our resiliency for runners workshop.
Yeah, yeah. So, but I have definitely been seeing like different athletes come in from other places, and even like trainers or coaches from other places come in and like take the classes or the hybrid style classes there because they are very specific and they are intense. They may not be as intense in terms of people don't really know what it is because it is new, but that is cool to see like in the coaching community because I'm not a coach, but it is cool to see these different people come through and want to take part in like somebody else's business because you think of business and like you work at this business person or you're supposed to be competing, but it's not really all about that, right? So
No, I think it's that growth mindset, right? Where I think the more supportive, gyms are for each other, the bigger we build the community, everyone wins. Whether it's, Elevate or any of these other gyms, in DC, I think, everyone wins. Everyone can support each other. And it's like the whole, idea of like having two pizza shops in the corner. If it's not competing against each other, but if they both make really good pizza, guess what? They're going to bring that much more people to the corner to go eat pizza, right? And it's the same thing with gyms. You could bring, not just one great high rocks gym, but you have two, three, four high rocks gyms. Guess what? There's going to be that many more people interested in doing high rocks, here in the DC community, and they're going to want to go to all these gyms and get better. So I think it's a great city for that environment, which is awesome.
I've jumped in a couple of like run group runs. I don't do the big run group thing. It's too much going on there. Like it's a lot of people. But like some of the smaller run groups, but I think it might be my personality. Like I'll just pop in randomly. Like I'm not going to be a regular, but I'll definitely know. I'll be known. Like my face will be known. But I like running with the groups here and there. But it's hard to like schedule it
Hey
sometimes.
man, we'd love to have you at Every Person Run Club. Come on down, Wednesdays and Sundays.
Yeah, that definitely is. That's the easy run day. So I definitely need to do it. And again, like it's community. So DC is definitely good for that. And but yeah. So let's get into. I got a couple more questions. So like I want to get technical. So
Sure.
what would you say if you had to pick? I don't know, two or three like movements, mobility movements that everybody should be doing at home. And I'll keep it specific to runners. I'm not even gonna say high rocks. Like somebody that's just running. What
Sure.
what would be those like couple of do these movements?
let's hone in on the hip flexors here. Let's
Okay.
hone in on the hip flexors here because everyone's got tight hips, right? Everyone says they got tight hips and they keep stretching and they keep foam rolling and they keep mashing and they're doing all the things, dry needling, and their hips maybe they get a little bit of relief, right? But it never sticks, right? And for me, I think that it comes back to the feeling of tightness, right? Tightness is tight, it's tight, it's tight. It feels tight. Tightness, it's a feeling, just like happiness, just like sadness, it's a feeling, right? That comes from your brain. And so your body, when it doesn't necessarily have this sense of stability, not saying that your hips are going to like dislocate or anything like that, but when it doesn't necessarily have that sense of stability that it needs, it looks to create it artificially, right? And so that artificial feeling of security, that's you being like, ooh, this is tight. I need to stretch, right? And so what happens, you keep stretching, you keep stretching, you keep stretching, and it never fully goes away, right? It goes away for 30 seconds, it goes away for an hour, a couple hours a day, maybe, right? But then it comes right back, and then you got to stretch your hips again. And so for me, I want to swing the pendulum to the other side and start to load these tissues, right? Your hip flexors, at the end of the day, really, in my opinion, are the most overstretched and undertrained muscle in the body. Because think about when you're a runner, right, and you're going for a 5K or you're doing a marathon, or you're an ultra marathon, or you're just going to do a mile. You know, think about how many steps you take. Every time you take a step, what happens? Hip flexion. Your hip flex,
Hmm.
you're flexing your hip. Your hip flexors are working, right? So over the course of doing, 5,280 feet, right? That's 1 mile. You're taking a ton of steps. So, times that by 26.2, that's a ton of steps, right? And so the hip flexors, it's not that they need to get stretched more, they need to get released. They need to get stronger, right? And so while that may not isn't necessarily, I don't know if that's the mobility hack you're looking for, it's, you know, train those muscles, don't just stretch those muscles. And so, the hip flexors, load them up. I love, doing like, some sort of like seated straight leg raise, standing, lifts where you put it, you're able to use a band or a kettlebell, something where you're able to load that hip flexor. I think that's, super valuable and it really helps people, um, you know, I think you'll see the difference once you start loading those tissues. Um, it's not, all of a sudden it's not tight, and you're able to realize that your body just, is craving that sense of load. And so I think once you start loading it, um, you know, people start to not only, you know, have less tightness, but then all of a sudden they start to run faster, and that's a pretty good thing, right?
Yeah, that's a good one. So, hip flexors. That is that. I think that it's so many different movements you can do to strengthen those, and even like when you talk about strengthening, then there's like the warm up, and it's the idea of stretching versus like
Oh, man,
actively stretching or
here
actively
we go.
warming those things up.
Yeah,
So like I like that. I forgot the name of it, but the 90/90s. Like I like the 90/90s. Like I had literally only ever done those maybe like a couple of years ago. I started doing them, but like they're literally something I do like every day now.
yeah. And what what that is, it's hip mobility versus hip flexibility, right? And so for me, I'd rather teach you how to actively move through those positions so that you're able to create a connection between your brain and your muscles on how to get into those positions, not just hold a hip flexor stretch, right? Because if I hold a hip flexor stretch, right, sure, I'll decrease my sensation to stretch. And again, maybe I'll move better temporarily, but I'm not creating that connection between my brain and those muscles on how to move into those positions. And so by doing that, by doing something like the 90/90 hip switches, you're creating that connection and it's going from that short-term, fix to really a long-term solution. And I think that's, how we move the needle forward, where you're not just like, I need to stretch, 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 stretch. This isn't working, because it's literally the definition of insanity. You're banging your head against the wall, expecting a different result, right? The definition of insanity. And when it comes to stretching, what I always tell people is, if you like to stretch, go ahead. If you don't like to stretch, don't. The research out there supports, that stretching, while it doesn't, it doesn't improve performance, It doesn't decrease your risk of injury, but it also doesn't decrease your performance, and it doesn't increase your risk of injury. So if you like to stretch, go ahead. But if you don't like to stretch, don't. Look at the world's fastest man, Usain Bolt. He can't even touch his toes, right?
Mm.
So who's to say that you need to stretch more?
Yeah,
So
that's
I think so I think, if you like to stretch, go ahead. There's those people out there that just don't get me wrong. For Personally, for me, if I stretch, yeah, it feels good. I'm not opposed to it. But the other people out there that stretching, you see them on the foam roller, look like they're dying, right? And you know exactly what I'm talking about. Look like you're dying. It's agony, right? It's like, why suffer? You don't have to suffer. It feels good, and so keep going. But if it doesn't feel good, stop.
yes, definitely. Definitely don't spend too much time doing that. I mean, I like to do it briefly after certain types of work, like runs.
Yeah.
But like nothing crazy, like just to get the blood flowing. But I realize
The
like if I don't do it, I'm not going to feel worse the next day. Right. So
Exactly. The foam roller, I call it the poor man's massage, right? Because it's feel good. That's what it is. It was probably about, God, like 12 years ago. I was just kind of getting into the strength conditioning world, and when I was first working in the Yankees organization, and it was, this new concept really, and maybe it wasn't as new a concept, but for me it was a new concept. And the general gist I was getting from anything I read or anyone I talked to was like, we know it does something, but we don't know what. And I was like, okay. And then, 10, 12 years later, I'm getting the same response. We know it does something, but we don't know what. I'm like, okay, all right, so it does nothing. We get it. But again, like I said, if it feels good. So who am I to tell you not to do it? That's what it comes down to. Who am I to tell you not to do it if it feels good?
no, that's definitely. I like that. I like that. It's good advice. And let's see where well before we get into how people can contact you, what resources do you think are like what other podcasts, websites or any recommendations on anything like that?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I mean, I think in the High Rocks community, I mean, the Elevate guys are doing it right, and I think they're just on to something special between what they're doing with the hybrid athlete program and the power athlete program. I think they're doing something really special. And not just for High Rocks racers, but for people who want to get into powerlifting too. And so I think those guys, if you're interested in you know, hybrid athlete stuff, obstacle course racing, or really, like I said, more strength stuff too, like getting into powerlifting. Um, you're My wife just walked by in front of the screen here. Um, and I think those guys are super valuable resources. So yeah.
Okay. And how can people contact you? And how can they be seen at big leagues? There's definitely multiple doctors that you practice. So
Yeah,
okay.
we got a great team. Myself, Dr. Kellen, Dr. Kennedy. There we got three great therapists. And all of us are very experienced at this point. Really experienced working with high rocks athletes, obstacle course racers, runners, and people really of all shapes and sizes, backgrounds, experiences. So yeah, our practice, Big League Performance and Rehab. bigleagueperformanceandrehab.com. On Instagram, it's Big League Perform and Rehab. We post, reels just about every day about like little ways to kind of take care of your body by yourself, which I think is super valuable for people. And then, yeah, and then on Instagram, I'm at Dr. Mike Yasson, Yasson. Yeah, hit me up, send me a DM. Happy to answer any and all questions, whether it's about you, your mother, your brother, boyfriend, girlfriend, any injury questions. That's always the popular topic on social media.
All right, man. Well, I actually could keep going, but I think
Oh, for sure.
we definitely got a nice discussion going here, and and maybe there'll be another one in the future. But this was a good discussion, and I think a lot of people that listen to my show, it's a newer show, but definitely some listeners out there. This will be of value because there's a lot of people don't really understand this side of the game. You see a lot of the flashy stuff on Instagram and online, and that's what people think is all that is happening, like these like crazy workouts, and like no, there's a lot of other pieces to the puzzle. Like people really have to focus on their health and like to make sure that they're able to keep going, and also make sure that they're not like pushing too hard, and because things do happen, right? And just realize that when things happen, you may need to go see somebody. And if you need to go see them before. If
exactly.
You're starting something new, so that's the key. If you're starting something new, maybe you should go see somebody before to see where you're at. Because, like for me, my ankle mobility has always been a thing. You know what I mean? And there's a bunch of things to do that I've been doing. So appreciate it.
Exactly. Well, thanks for having me on the show, man.
All right, and that's Now Until Up. Peace.